First and foremost, can you just speak to the importance of setting up accommodations in college?
It is critical that students who have been receiving accommodations continue to do so when they go to college. There are many students who feel like this is an opportunity for a fresh start, and they didn't like having to get extended time or any kind of special treatment when they were in high school, and so they want to start college anew and not have any accommodations, and this is a really bad idea. The reason being that learning differences, ADHD, various disabilities don't go away. So there is still a need for accommodations, and even if there's not, it's better to find that out by having the accommodations in place and then deciding that you don't need them, rather than attempting to take exams under standard time conditions only to realize later that you needed the extended time. Then there's no going back. Students find themselves in academic jeopardy, and they have to play catch up for the remaining time in that first important year. So it's really critical to get accommodations set up. In some cases, even before the first week of school, some students come in and find out what accommodations they can receive upon getting admitted to a college. That helps them make the decision.
So can you elaborate a little bit more on that? How would a student transitioning to college set themselves up to win with this?
So the first step would be to identify what the requirements are for documentation. On an institution's website, there is typically an office for students who have some kind of disability. Usually it's called disability services, accessible education, something along those lines. And there will be links to various disability groups and what their documentation requirements are. So a student should do that research before college begins so that they know exactly what documentation they need to have in place. And then they should make contact with the office and find out what the process is to set up the accommodations.
And what are some common differences between accommodations at the high school level and accommodations at the college level?
Well, that's also important because some students assume that their IEP that they may have had in high school or their 504 plan will automatically transfer and be accepted by the college, and that is not necessarily the case. In fact, it's typically not the case. It can be in community college, but at four-year institutions, they usually have their own set of documentation guidelines. And I should mention that this is constantly changing, so that's why it's very important to make contact with the office, because what I say here today could be different in 5 years. But nevertheless, the difference is, aside from the fact that the documentation guidelines may be different, there also are differences in terms of the types of accommodations that are available to students.
And what kind of accommodations are available typically in college?
So there are a wide range of accommodations that are determined based on the documentation and specifically the functional limitations that are documented. So for example, in addition to the extended test time and perhaps a private room that we addressed before, use of a computer with spell check, there also are accommodations. Really the most well-received accommodation is priority enrollment, particularly for students who attend large universities where it can be hard to get classes. So once they hear that, they're focusing mainly on the fact that they're going to get the good instructors and the classes they need. However, there is a good reason for that, for the priority enrollment, which is that a student can balance their course load, not have too many reading intensive classes. If they take medication, they can schedule their classes in such a way that maximizes the effects of the medication on their performance. They can schedule classes that are not back-to-back, so that if they have attention issues, they can have a break between classes. Also, if they're going to be getting extended time, they would need to have some time between classes that allows for that additional time to complete exams. So priority enrollment is definitely one that sometimes gets students through the door. There's also note-taking accommodations. Students can be approved to to have a classroom note taker, which would be typically another student in the class who can share their notes anonymously. There's a smart pen called a LiveScribe pen that many institutions can loan out for the purpose of getting additional access to the class lecture. So it actually records, it's a recording device that then allows you to revisit portions of the lecture. There's assistive technology that can be helpful for students with some types of reading disorders. And then I'd say there's just sort of general advocacy from the disability office for students who might need to drop a class or reduce their course load or whatever the case may be.
So regarding the transition to college, what else do college-bound teens with learning differences need to know?
One of the big differences upon the transition to college is the fact that a student now becomes his or her own self-advocate. So while in the past, the school may have been very active and their parents may have been very active in making sure that all the accommodations were in place, now it's going to really rest in the hands of the student. So a student needs to make sure that he or she is clear on what the expectations are. I often tell students that just as they go and get their books when it's the start of a new term, they also need to make their accommodations requests when it's the start of a new term. So it's very important that a student sit down with their counselor at the disability office and understand exactly what's expected of them so that they can get their accommodations that will allow them to be successful. And the same is also true with instructors. They should go to office hours. They should make their needs known. If they need additional clarification about class material, there are office hours where professors can address those questions. So they really should learn to be self-advocates.
Well, thank you so much for being with us today, Julie, and we look forward to seeing you on our next training on learning differences.